Hello and welcome to today's Town Hall. I'm Amanda Hart, Vice President of Client Services at AG Specialty Insurance. Today, we're diving into a game-changing solution for student athletes when they separate from an institution. We have an important set of topics to discuss, all related to the newly developed NCAA post-eligibility insurance program. Over the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to review questions asked by you, the membership, to help you better understand the aspects of the PEI program. With me today is Director of Insurance of the NCAA, Liz Schneckenberger, and CEO of AG Specialty Insurance, Dixon Gillis. Again, my name is Amanda Hart, the Vice President of Client Services at AG Specialty. Diving right in, Liz, to familiarize our audience a little bit more, before we get into the questions, can you just explain a little bit about your role at the NCAA and a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, of course. So I came onto the NCAA about a little over a year ago. I focus primarily on two things: ensuring that the NCAA Association is protected through insurance policies, and most importantly, ensuring that our student athletes have the highest standard when it comes to student health and wellness. I think that everybody can pretty much agree that getting the highest standards for our student athletes has been a common theme under our president, Charlie Baker. And truly, this past year has been so fulfilling because I've been able to create a program that drives so much value for our student athletes. And I'm just so excited to be able to be championing the highest standard available for our student athletes through student health and wellness.
Awesome. And Dixon, can you just familiarize the audience? Similar question. For those who aren't familiar with AG Specialty Insurance, just give them an idea of what our team does on a day-to-day basis and how we're integrated with the NCAA, the PEI program, and our presenting partner, Mutual of Omaha.
So as third-party administrator or the claims payer for a lot of secondary accident insurance programs in the NCAA, you might recognize us in that capacity. And through our service, savings, and some of the technology that we've worked closely with Liz and with our partners at Mutual of Omaha, we've come up with some really good tools for student athletes and member institutions to help fulfill and to satisfy some of the requirements for the PEI program.
Wonderful. So as we navigate through today's presentation, we would love to hear from you. There's a QR code on your screen that you can scan to ask a question about the PEI program. While we will try to answer as many questions as possible here live today, someone from our team will be in touch with you after today's session should we not get to your question. So, getting into the frequently asked questions, and before we do that, Liz, the PEI program has kind of been one of those hot button topics and conversation pieces. It's been live for just over 5 months now. So if you can just explain, I know you came in about a year after it started and everything started rolling, but if you could just describe maybe how we started versus to where we are today.
Yeah, of course.
Some high-level topics of the program.
Sure. Yeah, so I inherited the post-eligibility insurance program when I started at the NCAA. It started originally for Division I athletes and no other divisions. So originally it was essentially created or discussed to be for one division only. However, after careful consideration and membership feedback, the NCAA quickly chose to make the entire program association-wide and for all divisions and all student athletes. I think it's very important to note that it does include all student athletes association-wide. It's a policy that provides coverage for up to 2 years post-separation. After taking over this program and really trying to include as much membership feedback as possible, right? I remember being at the NCAA convention talking with you all, trying to talk to as many athletic directors as possible, just trying to get a feel for things that actually happen at the institution level and not how it's supposed to happen in theory, right? To ensure that the coverage was as broad as possible, because ultimately that's what this policy is intended to do, is to pick up any type of coverage that may fall through the cracks of another insurance policy, right? And ensure that no student athlete is left with any type of baggage or cost related to any type of athletic injury while they were playing or student athlete during their NCAA years. The NCAA I originally spoke about having the membership also fund this program, and then quickly decided it was probably better suited for the NCAA to fully fund it at the $26 million premium. Sure. In partnership with Mutual of Omaha.
Well, and Liz, real quick, if I could just jump in as part of this conversation, I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that the pivot from having the D1 institutions be paying for this to then opening up to all 3 divisions and then to fully fund it from the NCAA where there is no additional cost borne by the member institutions is truly a sign of what they are doing and committed to support student-athlete health and wellness. And in the spirit of opening up more benefits and opportunities for student-athletes to have access to great medical care, not only while they're on campus, but also after they've departed or withdrawn from a program.
Yeah, and I think that also goes into play of just listening to our members, right? And telling them we're hearing what you're saying, right? There's also no requirement, again, for any institution to purchase additional insurance. I know that that's always been a hot question within our membership. And so just want to clarify that this program does not require any additional insurance coverage to be bought.
Wonderful.
I want to touch on some of the high notes of the program, just for anybody who may not know them as much or maybe hasn't been attending some of the presentations that we've had so far to communicate and socialize the program. It began on August 1st of this year. So any athletic injury that happened on or after August 1st of 2024 is covered under this policy or eligible to be covered under this policy. Again, it covers all student athletes in all divisions. The policy is non-cancelable, so it will always be there. It cannot be canceled, and it is funded through our NCAA captive. The program is consecutive for 2 years or 104 weeks, and it allows for student athletes to receive coverage once they separate from school, or they voluntarily withdraw from their sport if they essentially end their sport but they're still in school, or they graduate and want to continue on their studies for graduate studies at the same school. So it allows for some multiple interpretations of how coverage can be triggered.
Well, and to your point, it's pretty nimble how the policy responds to a variety of different scenarios. And in the insurance space, that's sometimes challenging to do. So it's a big hats off to the steering committee at the NCAA and also your partners at Mutual of Omaha for coming up with a very dynamic benefit schedule.
Yeah, I think they were very receptive to a lot of the feedback we received from our members in broadening coverage. There were a lot of things that got deleted out of that policy. And you know, their entire team was fantastic to work with. And I think that just goes to show how much of a partner they are with collegiate sports and members of the NCAA. Just touching on some high notes of the policy, it offers $90,000 of limits for each injury. Of that $90,000, it provides $25,000 of medical benefit coverage, which I think is pretty unique, right? I mean, you guys probably see it a lot in what you deal with.
Absolutely, and I know we'll touch upon this a little bit later, but the reality that we're including $25,000 of accident medical coverage for mental health treatment in a way that is different from the traditional coverage of mental health benefits that we'll get into later on.
Without a doubt. So thank you. Dixon, with AG, if you can talk a little bit about how we are integrated with the PEI program specifically, followed by, I know we have a couple of main topics that we want to cover for our audience based on a lot of the feedback we've received and the questions that we have incoming. Just cover kind of what those are.
So I would say since Liz's inception or coming into the NCAA and getting to know you and the program and then getting to know what we serve for the over 700 colleges as a part of the NCAA, I think it made a lot of sense for us to join forces in the capacity of a claims payer to provide the service, savings, and technology, and also to piggyback a lot of the programs that we serve on a secondary basis. Their claim might eventually dovetail into a PEI claim. And so, but I think for today, we're going to try and cover three main topics. We're going to talk about eligibility criteria. We're going to talk about how to file a claim and the electronic submission process. Then we're also going to go over the coverage and breaking down the benefits.
Perfect. So let's get into the eligibility criteria. Liz, I know you talked about this a little bit in the opening, describing the policy, but ultimately who is covered under this specific policy?
Yeah, any student athlete that sustains an athletic injury while they're playing after or on August 1st of 2024, as long as that injury is documented at the school level, they are eligible for coverage. It also includes prospective student athletes who have signed non or irrevocable offers. But I do want to highlight that I think the word documentation may get misconstrued sometimes. There's lots of forms of documentation that are accepted for proof of an athletic injury while you're, playing at an institution. And, you guys can talk about this too, whether it's, an athletic trainer, a medical student health center. There's lots of documentations or paper trails that can be tied back to an athletic injury.
Right, it's not going to be so prescriptive to the extent that one form has to be completed in one capacity. I mean, we have our claim filing form, but the documentation that supports the occurrence of the injury is really dynamic as well, where you might have resources on a D1 campus providing a lot of support around the athletic training room to help facilitate some of that documentation. Maybe at another school that might not have as many of those resources, the documentation could be resided at the student health center or maybe the counseling center. And so it's just important for the audience on the call and for the membership to know that documentation can come from any point in the process, but so long as it actually links back to the injury that occurred while on campus, then we're going to be in a position of considering the claim.
Absolutely. Well said.
So it's no secret that there's a lot of chatter and a lot of discussion around the term separation from an institution, primarily as it relates to the transfer portal and graduate student athletes. But let's say it's really the transfer portal right now, right? So let's talk about if a student athlete transfers or graduates with athletic eligibility remaining and kind of expand upon that. How would this policy be in effect for them?
Yeah, I think this is probably a very common question, especially with the increased activity of the transfer portal. Essentially, if a student athlete were to leave their initial school, enter the transfer portal, the post-eligibility policy would come into play once they are separated from their initial school. If there was an injury sustained at the initial school and their primary policies would obviously come into play, and the post-eligibility would be able to be triggered, and the post-eligibility claim would follow the life of that injury, right?
104 weeks, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Per injury. Once the student athlete then re-enrolls into the next school that they transfer to, right, they are no longer eligible under the post-eligibility insurance program, right, but they still have the coverage from the school and their primary insurance policies. So the post-eligibility insurance program would be eligible once they separate from that second school that they transferred to.
But just to be clear, that initial injury still is okay and still within that 2-year benefit period, even when they reactivate into a new institution.
Correct. Yep.
Great. So continuing on the trend of separation, if a fall sports student athlete exhausts their eligibility in November, but doesn't graduate until the spring, say May, are they considered separated from athletics in November when their season ends, say it's a women's soccer student athlete, or upon graduation in May?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and feel free to add in here too, because I think this plays a lot into some nuances within the policy, but ultimately, the student athlete would be recognized as separated once they graduated. However, this is why we also put into place a voluntary withdrawal form, so that if you do end your sports season early and you're still enrolled in school, right, however you want to receive benefits because you did sustain an injury, it allows for you to withdraw from your sport and any sport, right, because you do get separate eligibility for different sports. It allows you to trigger the policy and receive benefits from it if you so choose to complete that voluntarily withdrawal form.
Okay, great. Dixon, anything to add?
I would just add that the dynamicness of the eligibility and the criteria of the PEI policy is all-encompassing to the extent that it really depends on a lot of the timing of the secondary insurance in play for the injury that occurred, and also when that benefit period might be exhausted or ceased. and then when the PEI policy would kick in, and then also some overlapping of those two policies working together to provide benefits. The ultimate goal is that the student athlete does not have any financial responsibility for injuries that occur while they were on their campus. And so to take in the variety of different hypotheticals that we're looking at, that is how we would be contemplating a claim, to make sure that we're honoring no financial responsibility for a eligible claim that happened while on campus. And then we deal with the nuances of whatever their specific situation may be, as departing, graduating, post-grad, grad programs, et cetera.
Yeah, well said.
So a question that we received as part of the registration process from our audience, does the two-year benefit period, apply to all injuries incurred during an athlete's career, or is it just the injuries that are not considered resolved at the time of separation? So, for example, I'm a freshman student athlete. I get injured August 2nd of this year. Fast forward a few years down the road, whenever it's time to graduate. My knee injury that I had when I was a freshman, I was cleared to play. My knee injury flares up as soon as I graduate, and I'm eligible for this policy. So is it still, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Continue from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this policy is intended to provide coverage in that scenario. Ultimately, as long as the injury is sustained on or after August 1st of 2024, it's eligible anytime the student athlete separates from their institution, enters transfer portal, or voluntarily withdraws from their sport.
And so here's where I think a little bit of the paradigm shift needs to happen from the athletic training room, because I think traditionally, once a student athlete is cleared, even if they're still within their 4 or 5 years of eligibility and they're enrolled, that would then cease the benefits from the secondary policy. But this policy is...
For that specific injury.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
But in this case, for the PEI, should that person, a year after they've separated from a program or graduated, and then there tends to be a reoccurrence in some capacity that can be documented and linked back to that specific injury from August 2nd, 2024 as a freshman, first-year student athlete, then I think the policy would then consider that claim to be eligible. And so that's what's really unique. And I think as we look to provide some of the better practices for the athletic training rooms and athletic departments, not only is the documentation key when an injury is occurring, but upon a student athlete's separation from a program or graduation, while the exit examinations and the exit physicals, they're critical, but those can be really valuable opportunities for athletic leadership to be engaged with student athletes in the capacity of, is there anything else that you've occurred or sustained while you were practice playing or traveling here at our institution that we need to document at this time? Not to open up a variety of scenarios, but in the spirit of trying to offset a misnomer or a misunderstanding or perhaps a fraudulent claim that's being submitted 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road. This is a really good practice for a lot of the athletic training officials and
Sports medicine
department leadership, the sports medicine team.
Yeah, and I know that our athletic training rooms do a good job of this already, right? I think maybe it's just reminding the student athletes of the benefits that they have right now after they separate from school, and that it's there for them to use, right? We want this policy to be utilized. And so, just making sure that student athletes know it's there and educating them is probably one of the biggest hurdles, I think, in making sure that the policy does get triggered.
Well, and I also would go, it's been a huge compliment of the NCAA and Mutual of Omaha to be able to consider the burden that is placed on the sports medicine teams within each institution. And so trying to find ways to offset that burden by no financial encumbrance from a school, but also some of the technology that we'll get into later to help facilitate the submission process and the communication of a student athlete's claim once they've departed an institution.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's worth noting that during this entire process, right, we have had prior athletic trainers on our committee of creating this program, right? And so we understand the concerns, the limited resources that they have, right? They're wearing multiple hats for every sport, even in some cases, right? And so we wanted to make sure we weren't adding to their administrative burden, right? And ultimately, essentially creating a bare minimum requirement from documentation, which is why I say there's many different ways of documenting an injury or providing a paper trail. And like you said, we'll get into some of the technology. I think that will take a lot of the burden off and make it just easy to file a claim, which is what we want.
So I think we covered this earlier, but just to reiterate, I think it's really important for the institutions and the membership to understand, does an NCAA member institution need to buy more insurance coverage to support this program in any capacity?
No, they do not. And there's nothing in any of the bylaws or requirements or any of the socialization that we've done this far that should say that.
Sure.
And so, yeah, to be clear and for all the members listening in, there's no requirement for additional insurance by any means.
I think there was a little bit of confusion there because very early on,
Sure.
when it was just proposed as a Division
Right,
I
and
level,
members were supposed to pay for
they
it.
were going to have there was going to be a membership cost,
Right.
right? So for those who heard about it and then kind of was like, all right, this is going to happen August 1, but now we're in the process in the time frame, 5 months in, end of a semester, we're about to have claims that are going to come through the door with student athletes separating from institutions, entering the transfer portal.
Right.
That now everyone's worried about cost. This is also a time of year where a lot of members are working on budgets for next year. So it's an important conversation to have.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up.
And a huge step up from NCAA to fund it entirely for all 3 divisions, when a year or so ago it was looked at maybe just Division I was going to have to be funding on their own.
Yep. No, that's very true.
So let's talk about secondary athletic insurance programs and plans. Is there still a need for a school to have those to cover medical costs related to athletic injuries that may be left after the athlete's primary insurance has paid?
So think about this program conceptually, right? This is when a student athlete leaves a program. So that's where the PEI program is really going to kick in. It's going to be supplemental and benefit coordinate with the secondary plans. But at the same time, when a student athlete is on campus and they're injured, there's absolutely the need to have secondary coverage, whether it's through insurance or through a self-funded vehicle of risk transfer. I think it's really important to know that this program does not replace a secondary insurance program. It can only really supplement and complement, especially once they've left the institution.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's not intended to replace the bylaw requirements either that all NCAA members must abide by. But it is intended to provide benefits to the student athletes where maybe their current policy or secondary policy only provides limited coverage or even additional coverage that may not be covered under their policy. So it's truly intended to make sure that the student athlete does not have any burdens from their playing days and can continue to thrive on in the next part of the journey of their life.
Sure, great. So let's talk about primary insurance. When you're a student athlete, when you're enrolled and you're maintaining your athletic eligibility, it's a requirement to have some sort of primary insurance in most cases, right?
Yep.
So what about post-graduation? Is that still a requirement in order to be eligible for this policy?
No, absolutely not. So there's no requirement for anybody to have primary insurance in order to trigger the post-eligibility insurance program once they separate from school. So, and I think, you know, student athletes it's ingrained in them that they must provide primary insurance in order to participate within their sport. But it's very noteworthy to say that once they separate, the post-eligibility insurance program can become their primary insurance coverage.
Great. Let's go back to the voluntary withdrawal form, because I think there's probably, if there's any student athletes watching, that might be a question that they have on what is it, and just kind of expand upon where they can, you know, maybe who do they go to for that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's truly a form that is, essentially it was created solely for the post-eligibility insurance program. We know that there's financial impact when somebody is playing a sport, right? And this does not affect that by any means. And so what we wanted to do is create a separate form because schools do have their own forms available to withdraw from a sport, but I know that impacts some other things other than just your health benefits. So this is purely for the post-eligibility insurance program, right? And if they withdraw from their sport, right, then it allows them to receive benefits. I believe it's already ingrained into the form on the post-eligibility insurance website that they can go online, fill it out, along with the submission of their entire claim form. And feel free to add some color here, because I know I'm missing something, but...
No, that's spot on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going through, we have to have 2 years, we have 104 weeks benefits period, right?
Right.
Full 2 years.
Right.
Let's talk about any other eligibility criteria that we may be missing, with whether it be NCAA, with the policy, Dixon, from your perspective with AG. I know we're going to talk about a claims process moving forward, but anything eligibility-wise that you guys would like to add before we move on?
I would say just reiterating some of the basic requirements, which is it must have happened on or after August 1st of this year, of 2024. It has to be within an NCAA recognized sport. So club sports, things that you're doing ancillary are not covered under this policy. It also, there has to be some documentation of the athletic injury happening while they were a student athlete at the institution.
I would say too, maybe the cheerleading component I think is important to discuss, and very similar to the cheerleading component that you have on the secondary program as it relates to the CAT medical. So for a cheerleader to be supporting a qualifying intercollegiate sport at their time of injury would then be eligible for a claim under the PEI, but if it wasn't, then it would not.
That's a good point. This policy does mimic a lot of the catastrophic policy as well. And student athletes don't have to do anything to be enrolled to receive benefits, right? They're automatically covered today. Every single student athlete is covered today in all divisions. So the only thing or action that they ever have to take is if they need to file a claim to receive benefits.
Wonderful. So we do have a question live from the audience. Is the NCAA planning to share any documentation to give student athletes upon separation and how to utilize this policy? Step-by-step instructions, or what will they need to submit, etc.?
That's a great lead-in for us for the next section, right?
Yeah, it really is.
No, it's great, and I think we'll get into the claim submission process and the landing page and the website for student athletes if they're at their institution and they want to be forward-thinking about submitting a claim to submit at that time, or once they've departed institution, they realize that they need access to care, they can go on and do it now. So I think it's important in the spirit of the education of this town hall and in general with what the NCAA has been doing all year about access to some of the educational materials through the website primarily that can be loaded. And we'll do a demonstration of that specific process in the next section.
Yeah, I would also say, athletic trainers can get creative, right? If you want to, we've got a website, right? If you want to put up a QR code in the athletic training room and, you can say, hey, there's a bunch of information regarding all the benefits that are afforded to you. Once you separate, you can send the student athletes there, right? From a step-by-step perspective, every school has different resources, right? And so we don't really want to require steps or things or add any administrative burden to athletic trainers, right? We know you guys have a lot of things to do already, so we don't want to add to that workload. But certainly, educating student athletes is got to be top priority for every stakeholder involved, right?
And we just want to drive the activity to the website to really allow a student athlete to research and to take control of the submission process so that it doesn't create a burden on the athletic training departments.
And I think your student athlete advisory committee members that you have on campus are a huge resource to be able to help with that. I was actually chatting with I believe she's the incoming chair, Meredith Page, last week, and had a really good conversation with her about how we can help get that message out, and she was absolutely on board with helping us be an advocate for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of resources that can be advocates for this program. And definitely educating, get the word out, socializing, and really just getting people to that website, because that's really where all the information is, and everybody lives off their phones anyways, right? So we tried to make it as easy and integrated as simply as possible to how everybody lives today.
Wonderful. Well, we are going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to take a look at actually how to file that claim and answer some of those questions that we were just asked from the live audience.
On campuses nationwide, the NCAA is making transformative changes for student athletes. While they pursue their biggest dreams, we're launching new initiatives to help them. Life-changing education opportunities are just the start. The NCAA is providing enhanced mental health services. We're guaranteeing scholarships and tuition and expanding access to healthcare. Visit ncaa.org/change to learn more.
You protect those you love in many ways. Sometimes by shielding them. Other times, by opening up a future of possibility. This is your kingdom. Protect it fiercely. Mutual of Omaha. Protect your kingdom.
Welcome back to the NCAA PEI Town Hall. And a special thank you to today's presenting partner, Mutual of Omaha. So we've already covered some eligibility questions and surrounding about who's eligible and when. We're now going to take a look at how to file a claim. This process can be completed by a student athlete, an administrator, or anyone under an institutional member. Before we dive into those details, as a reminder, you can ask a question at any point in time. If you'd like to ask the question, scan the QR code on your screen. While we will try to answer as many questions as we can live, understand that someone from our team will be in touch with you after, should we not get to your question. So, back here, hypothetically speaking, I'm a student athlete who sustained an injury in November of this year, and I'm graduating next week. Knowing that my injury will need ongoing care, what do I do next?
Well, so we recommend you file the claim. And to get ahead of it, to go to the website that we're going to bring up, and we'll do a tutorial here and work on submitting the claim, and we'll have the approval process with your member institution contact, and then we'll consider the claim to be eligible or not, and we can take it from there.
I think it's also important to note that we have built this system to make sure the ease of submitting a claim from a student athlete to the approver process at the institutional member to getting to AG Specialty Insurance to pay and process that claim in an efficient manner. We've put a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that this process is as simple as possible. Whether it's from your computer, your iPad, your phone, you're able to do that in any facet. So,
yeah, I mean, make no mistake. So a lot of the submission process in the current environment can be cumbersome as it relates to a billing cycle or getting other required information. So we have worked very closely with Liz and her team and our IT team to support Mutual's benefit plan in a way that makes it very simple. Ultimately, again, for the NCAA's perspective, not having any financial burden on the student athletes and also not having any administrative burden about first sports medicine professional on campus to have the burden of helping to file this claim. So
yeah, and anybody who knows that a post-eligibility insurance claim is coming down the line, feel free to get out ahead of it, file it. Our team will do their due diligence, right, and we'll make sure that it gets paid or, you know, goes through the right process. So certainly an option.
For sure. So with that, we're going to take a look at the filing of a claim process. This system can be found, and you'll be able to see the website after this, but on the posteligibilityinsurance.com. But we're going to share a quick video playback, just an overview of our electronic claims filing process. So this process will link directly to our claims adjudication system, EGBAR. You first have to acknowledge that you've had the injury on or after August 1st. You can't get any further if you can't acknowledge that part. This can be completed by, like I said, your student athlete, someone at your member institution, or sometimes if it could be even mom or dad. So the very first piece here are just the student athlete details: name, date of birth, contact information, all the high-level pieces of information that we need to pay and process that claim. So one point to note as we go through this entire injury report, as you see at the top, is anything with a yellow box is a requirement in order to submit your claim. The system will not let you submit it if you do not fill it out.
And this entire form can be filled out laptop, mobile. It's mobile friendly.
It is absolutely mobile friendly, yes.
So you can do it on any type of electronic device.
Yes.
That's great. I'm counting down the time to see how long it takes for this entire thing to get done, so I'll let you guys know at the end.
So the next piece is your injury details. So what does that mean? Your injury details are the initial date of injury when that happened, whether in this case I believe it's a knee injury. And you just fill out all of the details, what body part, where it happened, so on and so forth.
And you won't be allowed to proceed through this filing process unless all the yellow boxes are completed.
That's correct.
And some of the information. But at the same time, if you need to go refill something or if you need to save it and come back to it, it's very user-friendly, as we pointed out. And so as we look at this a little bit, watching what's on the screen, it is quite simple just to capture some of the basic fields of the injury so that we can populate the claim and we can, as we'll see later on, confirm with the member institution that all of the details are in line with the documentation that they've had on file from when the injury occurred while they were on campus.
Right. So the fourth piece of this puzzle here is our primary or family insurance information. Again, high-level detail of who your insurance carrier is, policy details, group numbers, and if you already have an existing claim on file. So for example, if this is a member institution that currently works with AG Specialty or another third-party administrator, claims payer, and you have that information, it's incredibly helpful to put that here at the bottom of the screen where you add the name of the claims payer, and if you have a claim number, it just will help your process become more efficient across the board.
I think I would say Liz and the team at Mutual of Omaha saw the value of having sort of our repository of claims that would be on file along with when these would come in so that we can sync them in a way that, again, is trying to offset any of the administrative burden with the sports medicine teams on a campus.
Yeah,
and so I think with a lot of this recapturing it and the fact that the athletic trainer is not required to be submitting this, they can,
right.
But if it's the student athlete's responsibility or maybe if they're not on campus, then the student athlete can do it, and then we'll see how the emails come through to verify this on a campus once the student athlete's left.
Right. So the fifth piece is your institutional contact information. I did a shameless plug of my alma mater, Indiana University of Pennsylvania here, with your institutional contact member. You'll also have an opportunity to view the top bar. Make sure there's a checkbox in every area on this form. If there's not, you're missing something. So here we had to go back, make sure we select that voluntary withdrawal information. You have the ability to upload any documentation surrounding your claim as a student athlete at this point. You also have to sign to just authorize that your everything you've submitted is accurate to the best of your knowledge. Click the little fun thank you or
the fraud language,
and then submit your claim. So how and where do I file that claim? We showed you how, but where you file it is www.posteligibilityinsurance.com. This will also give you some information with FAQs, a lot of similars to what we're reviewing today. Yep. Also some contact information for our team if you have additional questions, and we'll be able to share some of that contact information at the end of today as well.
I do want to jump in here. One thing, Amanda, is you'll notice as they just went through that entire form, there's a lot of drop down, right? There's a lot of information. One thing we also wanted to capture is some data, right? So how can we continue to improve on this program, right? This is year one. So, my thought process is, how are we going to make this better 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? I think the landscape in collegiate sports is ever changing, right? And, the stakes just continue to get higher and higher. So how do we make sure that we're providing our student athletes with everything that they need to be performing at the top levels in which they're required to?
And I think, too, it's also a measure of Mutual of Omaha's flexibility as we work through the renewal process annually. And it's also where your openness to making some schedule of benefit changes and some adaptations to some of the feedback that we get from audiences like today and the membership in general. So the feedback is critical if things are working well, if there are challenges, so that they can be incorporated in the stewardship throughout the year and also upon the renewal strategy that you have with Mutual of Omaha.
Yeah, and truly, Mutual of Omaha is a great partner. They truly listen to all of the feedback we give them, and they do make changes. And if they don't, I make them make changes. But we definitely want to make sure, right? This is for student athletes to utilize, right? We want them to receive the benefits, and we want to make sure that those benefits are actually valuable to them, right? And that they're using them to ensure that, again, they're getting every opportunity possible to be the best student athlete that they can.
Wonderful. So you might be asking yourself, what happens after this claim is submitted to AG? What happens next? So as an institutional member, if you were listed as that institutional contact when that claim was submitted, you will shortly after receive an email to verify or not the claim. So we're going to show you a quick little piece of what that email response looks like. That email will have all of the coverage, all of the actual benefits of, or all of the actual injury information that the student athlete originally put in. There's also a reference code and a please respond here link below that reference code. That reference code is highlighted in yellow. So whenever you have that information, copy that reference code, click that link. When we go through that process, we're now going to show you what it looks like as an administrator going into the same exact platform that you submitted the claim, but to approve and verify that injury.
Let's take a look.
Okay, so here you can see we've copied and pasted that reference code, verifying that we have the correct injury. And then here, the second piece is really just verifying all the initial information that the student athlete put in. You'll see on the right-hand side, you have an opportunity to correct things. So one of the questions we had, what if the file date of injury doesn't match what the school has on file? You have the ability to counter that whatever was initially put into the system, so that we can actually verify with the documentation that you provide us moving forward to pay and process that claim.
So I think one of the biggest concerns about what would happen with when a student athlete departs from a program is the possibility for fraud. And so what we tried to bake into this platform is the chance for a school to respond to the student athlete's reason for the submission. And I think this is a really good way to approve, deny, or adjust what may be said from a student athlete's perspective and a school's perspective. And it's all not final say. They can go back and we can continue to work with all the parties involved to realign what truly happened on a campus for an injury. So I think it's a really, again, dynamic tool that allows the membership to not be encumbered by a student athlete with this entire process, but by providing a quick...
Excuse me for 1 second, I want to interrupt you. So this last page here, this is where you can actually verify or do not verify the claim. As we, so if you have in the previous, 2 slides previously, when you had additional information, if you didn't have this injury on file or this wasn't any injury that you knew to be in existence, you could actually type that information in and say, this actually isn't a legitimate claim that we have documentation on, and do not verify at the end. So regardless if it's a claim that you have on file within your system with that documentation or not, it's important to go through this process so that you can verify or not verify that claim.
Yeah, that's a really good point too.
And then simultaneously, if there is a lack in responsiveness from a student athlete or from a member contact, maybe the member contact was put in incorrectly, there's a variety of different reasons. We have behind the scenes on this platform the dashboard that will alert us to a lack of responsiveness. And so on certain cues, the logic's built into it to make sure that we're reaching out to either the student athlete who filed the claim or a member contact who maybe didn't respond within a certain amount of time, and we go from there.
Sure, and I think it's really important. I think a lot of student athletes, when they're on campus, they get used to one athletic trainer, right? The person who travels with them, the person who helps them with treatment. That's all, I mean, that's normal, right?
Right.
If an institution has a different person that's doing these verification processes, you have the ability on that approval process to change who will get that information moving forward so that the athletic trainers can really hopefully focus on what they need to. That's clinical care, that's being in the athletic training room supporting the student athletes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that also ensures that claims are consistently moving along and getting adjudicated as appropriately. So.
Totally. For sure. And one more piece, once we hit verify or do not verify, that will then push it into our system, as Dixon mentioned, and that we can then take the process regardless of the outcome and handle it from our processes to pay and process the claim efficiently, or not. Okay, so Liz, one member institution asked, how are athletes supposed to know they have this insurance coverage once they separate from an institution, and what are they supposed to do to file a claim? We've already covered some info on filing the claim, so can you provide some insight on the importance of education around the policy? I know we touched on this a little bit already, but if you can just continue to
Well, I think
stress the importance.
That's it, right? We have to continue to reiterate the information and letting student athletes know that this is available to them, right? I don't think you can say it enough, right? And constantly, right? It's sort of out of sight, out of mind, right? Until you need it, right? Or you need to file a claim, and then it's, oh, what do I do, right? And so I think it's beholden upon everybody that comes into contact or that's involved in a student athlete's daily life, right? Daily activities, what they do, to remind them and just let them know that this is there for them, right? It's for them to utilize to receive benefits when they need it.
I'd say too, I mean, we're 5 months into it. So it's very young.
Very.
And in its infancy, we'll continue to be monitoring the activity on this. We'll be continuing to encourage the marketing of the website to a student athlete. And so from an athletic training room, the suggestion would be to really just push that information out to them in whatever capacity or format. Obviously, your comms team has a lot of communications that go out that encourage and remind everybody. We're trying to do some of that education to all the membership as well to make sure that they know where to go. And so I think to your point earlier, though, they're probably going to call their athletic trainer, the one that they know best. And so hopefully that athletic trainer can just say, I'm not the person, go to posteligibilityinsurance.com and figure it out, call me if you have any questions. That way, again, they're washing their hands of it a little bit so they're not encumbered in the athletic training room for what their primary duty is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. For all of our touch points, we do try to put it into like the student athlete guide for new and coming student athletes, right? We also try to get it into the parents' hands to let them know that this is also available, right? Because sometimes, you know, parents are the ones handling these
You think
things.
the parents have a say in some of this? What do you think?
A little bit. But yeah, no, all very good points.
So when exactly should a claim form be submitted? I know we've talked a little bit around it. We've danced around it a little bit. But when is there a direct point when that claim form should be submitted?
I don't think there's I think in standard policies, there's like a 90-day or 100 and something day. You guys know this better than I do. But ultimately, that is not in this policy, right? Essentially, as long as you are filing a claim within the benefit period, right, it's eligible to be considered for a claim.
That's also a bit of a nuance to this policy versus some of the traditional secondary policies. There is maybe a 90 or up to a bracketed 180 days of eligibility to submit a claim, your first notice of loss within 180 or 90 days of your first medical expense. But the idea with this one, with being 2 years, we encourage you, if you think you're going to be seeking medical help, or if you think you're going to be filing a claim, to file a claim as soon as possible. And again, it's really key that the documentation is on a campus for when that injury occurred while they were on campus and suffered an injury representing that institution.
So Dixon, you touched on it a little bit just now. Is there a required timeline or deadline to initiate a claim with this policy?
Well, you can't go outside of the 2 years of benefit period and then submit a claim. So that would not be eligible if your medical expense is beyond the 2 years of your departure or withdrawal from a program. Again, we encourage you to file the claim as soon as you think you might need to file the claim.
The only other time I would say that you wouldn't be eligible is if your injury happened before August 1st of 2024.
So if a student athlete is about to graduate and they were injured this fall, would you encourage them to just start to file that claim process now, or is it up to them to wait until they have anything recurring?
It's probably a better idea to file the claim now so that you can do it in synchronicity with your athletic training department to make sure that the documents match up and some of the approval process that we just looked at lines up. And then it could just be in waiting in limbo should they depart and then should they need access to care once they've left.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
So I think we know the answer to this one already, but what if a student athlete files a claim, says that they were injured, an injury occurred during their eligibility, but there's no documentation on file that anyone can find?
Well, hopefully we've made it pretty clear that you need to have documentation so far, and not only this today, but in all the communications that have gone out. So as far as the PEI program is concerned, and as far as Mutual of Omaha is concerned, if there is no documentation, it's as if the injury never happened.
Right.
So it is incumbent upon the student athlete to make sure that there is documentation, and while they're on a campus, to make sure that their injuries are being documented, which again supports another good best practice to, upon exit or departure or graduation, in whatever capacity, that your sports medicine team is documenting the injuries that occurred while they were enrolled at that school.
And again, documentation can mean many forms of things, right? So it's not, oh, one person is required and only an athletic trainer could document an injury, right? It like I said, it can be a paper trail relating back to an injury that a student athlete sustained while they were participating in an NCAA recognized sport.
Okay. I had one question that it escaped my brain real quickly, but Dixon, I think I would like you to expand upon the best practices. You talk about the documentation, making sure there's exit interviews, so on and so forth, but I think it's also important that the student athlete reviews that with their, whoever's doing that exit interview, right? Like two sets of eyes, because there is a responsibility of the student athlete, but also on the sports medicine staff to make sure both things are documented, right? Maybe expand upon that a little
Absolutely.
bit.
So there's the responsibility of a student athlete to present themselves for the exit interview. A lot of schools might have different requirements around their departure, but it is really key, especially now with this program being rolled out, that there is a mutual understanding of exactly what occurred while they were there. So best practices, whether that's check-ins with your athletic trainers through the year, during the year at certain times, maybe what we do 8-1 and 1-1, potentially, but also with the athletic trainer wearing many different hats, there could be the opportunity for them to have a different style of understanding exactly what may or may not have happened with the student athlete while they're on campus. But I think the visibility and the eligibility of this program now just demands much more communication between a student athlete and the documentation, whether it be at a student health center or at a career counseling center potentially, or in your athletic training rooms.
Yeah, and we do recognize, as well as Mutual of Omaha also recognizes, that sometimes student athletes don't show up for their exit interviews, right? Sometimes they end the season with a loss, and they don't want to do some things, which I understand. I have those days too. But ultimately, right, at some point of a student athlete sustaining an injury, it's very important that there is some sort of documentation, right? Whether they do go to a facility on campus, off campus, maybe it's an affiliated hospital, something of that nature, where you can find a paper trail leading back to the injury.
Perfect. So we have a question from the audience. For student athletes, it goes back to the transfer portal. We knew that was a hot button topic, right? For student athletes that transfer and may go to 3 to 4 schools within a career, does the 2-year separation period start at the end of eligibility from the final school? So does it only apply at the final institution? Technically, it would apply at each institution if they have an injury sustained when they would separate, correct?
Yeah, that's unique. I think there's also some wording in the policy that you have to be separated for quite a bit of time, right? You can't enter the transfer portal, I think, for a couple days. But ultimately, if there's an injury sustained and they did separate from school, it's eligible for a claim to be filed under the policy, and then the due diligence will take place.
I mean, unfortunately, it is a reality of today's environment of college athletics, where there are multiple schools that a student athlete might enroll or attend and participate in sports. But I think it's just important to know that the PEI eligibility will follow where the injury had occurred at the school. So let's say there was an injury at the first institution, they separated, the PEI would follow that claim in the need of, if it's manifest, to have medical expenses or in any capacity need more treatment. Let's say there weren't any injuries at the second or third school. I mean, again, a lot of the hypotheticals. It all goes back to making sure that from a best practices, you really are documenting what happened when, and you're confirming that to the extent that you can, because of what you just pointed out with somebody's maybe disenchanted leaving a school or disenfranchised potentially leaving a school. It's important for the medical team to make sure that we have on file what may or may not have happened while they were enrolled.
Yeah, and to be, I want to clarify, this policy is intended to provide benefits when a student athlete needs it, right? So if there is a need, we're going to look at that claim and all its merits and pay for the benefits for the student athlete if needed. So,
Of course.
And that's what's also really creative about the architects of the policy, where if this happens to come up more than once, or if there's some frequency in certain things that might be leading more to a denial, we're going to make some adjustments. You're going to make some adjustments. Like you said, if you want it in there, they're going to put it in there.
Right.
But if Mutual wants to work on that through the renewal process, then those are really good reasons why to adapt the policy.
Yeah, we're always constantly trying to figure out how we can make this better, like I said. And so it will constantly evolve. Like you said, it's in this embryonic stage, and I think it can only get better from here. So.
Right. So one last question that was submitted whenever we were doing our registration process.
Yep.
Definitely a little unique. What are the steps within the process of for the student athlete who does not want to utilize this medical insurance coverage?
Yeah, there's no obligation for any student athlete to utilize the post-eligibility insurance program. Again, it's just there for them to utilize, right?
I mean, it's counterintuitive, right? You think, hey, if you want benefits, then utilize the program. If you choose not to, maybe there's a reason. Maybe they don't want anybody to know that they have an injury, right?
Sure.
Sometimes there is that element where they don't want to file a claim so they can control some of the information that's out there on an injury. But the reality is, if you don't want to have, there's no obligation for a student athlete to utilize the PEI program.
Sure. Okay, great. So with that, we are going to take another quick break, and when we return, we will review all of the things of coordination of benefits and all things coverage.
We protect what we love to honor those who came before, so future generations can carry on the tune. This is your kingdom. Protect it fiercely. Mutual of Omaha. Protect your kingdom.
On campuses nationwide, the NCAA is making transformative changes for student athletes. While they pursue their biggest dreams, we're launching new initiatives to help them. Life-changing education opportunities are just the start. The NCAA is providing enhanced mental health services. We're guaranteeing scholarships and tuition and expanding access to healthcare. Visit ncaa.org/change to learn more.
Welcome back to our NCAA PEI Town Hall. And thank you to our special guest in the NCAA and Liz Schneckenberger.
Thank you for having me.
At this point, we've covered some eligibility questions and how to file a claim. We're now going to take a deep dive into policy coverages and coordination of benefits, what I think is the true fun stuff. So, with that being said, how will this post-eligibility insurance coexist with a secondary insurance policy?
Well, so much like the coexistence of primary insurance and secondary insurance, there is oftentimes the need for benefit coordination. So the goal is going to be that there will be no financial responsibility for the student athlete.
Right.
If there is, to create a hypothetical, if there is a primary insurance, that will be exhausted first. And then the secondary plan, based upon the timing of that benefit period, that would also be utilized. And then with the secondary plan being excess and the PEI plan being excess, those two programs will work together to split the remaining balances that are due. I think that's also a really good reason why AG being involved in the program can help to coordinate that from a behind-the-scenes perspective to provide that 50-50 split potentially, and we'll work closely with Mutual of Omaha through that coordination of benefits process as well.
Yeah.
So, just to reiterate, will the PEI plan act in place of secondary insurance plans many institutions carry, or will the PEI plan be tertiary?
I think that question probably stems from when it was originated, right? This entire idea of post-eligibility insurance. It essentially will not replace any requirements for schools to provide secondary insurance to student athletes, but it also does not mandate the additional purchase of any insurance for any schools or members. But it will, like you just mentioned and kind of clarified, is that there will be a coordination of benefits, right? And that's ultimately really what it is.
100%.
Yeah, it just depends. If there is no primary, then the secondary plan would typically drop down, and then the PEI program would become excess to that. And so that cascade is really just dependent upon what insurances are in place.
Yep.
And also the benefit period of the secondary plan. That plays a huge role in if this is going to be coordinating benefits or becoming secondary or primary.
Yeah, and I think another main and important fact to add is that this is a guaranteed cost program, right? It's $0. So it can also drop down, pay a deductible, right, to trigger benefits under a primary or secondary policy, right? So that student athletes can start receiving their benefits. And then the PEI would then, again, coordinate benefits for any remaining costs.
Right, because there won't be any financial responsibility left. So whether there's an outstanding deductible or co-payment, co-insurance, or balances that are due, the PEI program, if that is the last point of insurance, that would just be either excess, secondary, or primary, depending on what else is there.
Right, but either way, it will pay.
So we're getting into the weeds a little bit on this, or at least I am. So if, for example, a student athlete gets injured in August or September, right? And there are 2-year counter for typically most of our insurance policies that we work with have a 2-year benefit period, 104 weeks, similar to this program. Then the PEI program would just extend them by a couple months extra, correct? They'd have additional 2 months of benefit under that policy if they separated in December.
Yeah, once they separate from school, absolutely, they would have additional benefits. But again, it all comes down to all the nuances that come into play with what's being covered under the primary, secondary policies, and what's remaining.
Great. And Liz, I know you mentioned about the student athlete's deductible, but this policy will cover the student athlete's deductible ultimately?
Absolutely. Yeah, it can drop down, and it's pretty unique in that way, but it can drop down, pay any deductible in order to trigger benefits for primary coverage.
We have an interesting question. I love this one. Will the policy cover out-of-network medical procedures or procedures not covered by primary? For example, PRP injections or core muscle repair at the Vincera Institute?
Our good friends up the street.
Yes.
So it's interesting. I think a lot of the traditional insurance policies would place a little bit more leniency of denying benefits for some of those more unique treatments, like a PRP or sometimes DME and some of those other nuances, maybe a luxury item. But as we know, as the evolution of treatment for these student athletes has grown, not only in its complexity, also in its cost, I think our role here is to fulfill the needs of the athletic training departments that support a prescribing PRP or to go get core muscle repair with Dr. Myers and his team. And so this policy is going to follow that spirit to include coverage for scenarios that would be as prescribed by an overseeing medical professional that is either employed by or affiliated with an institution. So it's an important distinction. The purpose of the plan is not to prevent benefits from being issued. It's to support the benefits and the direction of care that the leadership team within an athletic department are championing to make sure that we're providing the best care for the student athletes. And so that would fall in line with approving some of those unique nuances from Vincera or other specialty facilities across the country.
Totally. Great. Let's talk about international student athletes. When they separate from their institution, what happens when they go home to get care? Would that all still be covered under this policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you guys deal with this a lot, so I'll let you chime in here for sure. But, you know, the NCAA has a lot of international student athletes, right? And we certainly do not want to exclude them from any type of benefit or coverage. And so the post-eligibility insurance program was created and designed to ensure that coverage is provided, right? A lot of times we do see student athletes go home to countries where they have universal health care, right? And so there it may be supplemental. And that's really where you all come into play and why we did bring AG in. It's because you guys are so good at this and have done a lot of international healthcare benefits for student athletes, and Dixon, feel free to add into.
No, again, I mean, it's just kudos to the architects of the policy to make sure that this is a global policy in the extent of if you have an international student athlete who is at home receiving treatment, or even a domestic student athlete who is being referred internationally to receive treatment, then this coverage would fall in line with providing benefits, again, so long as there was an injury that occurred on campus and was approved by an institution. So it's important to, I think maybe some of the confusion that some of those questions are arisen is because of the traditional policies might often decline benefits associated with treatment that it's outside the continental U.S.
And even outside the state sometimes, right? Some primary policies, right, only afford coverage in certain states. We know that. And so, yeah, it truly is intended to provide coverage wherever the student athlete may be.
I think what's really cool is that we at AG got a little taste of international payments for student athletes whenever COVID happened, right?
Yeah,
so getting to have that that experience, and with some of our other clients that we work with, knowing that we can push those payments out easily and effectively is really exciting.
Yeah, and truly, I think our international students do have a few additional barriers that domestic student athletes don't have, and so I think just also educating them, right, that this is also available to them, and letting them know that the benefits are there for when they need it, and we can still manage those claims from here in the U.S.
Great. Probably one of the biggest questions surrounding this policy is the mental health benefit, right? Typically, it's only covered when it's surrounding a concussion or a head injury, in most cases with the typical insurance policies that these student athletes are used to being part of. So what are the implications for mental health care under this policy?
That's a loaded question. You want to start with that one, too?
Sure. Give it a shot. So it's as we all know, the number one concern on a college campus from the president's and the provost's office, not just for student athletes, but for the entire student body, is mental health. And for many, many years, these athletic accident policies have had some restrictions around the mental health benefits associated with the policy, because they're not a major medical policy, they are accident-only policies. But as we've all seen, some of the similarities and some of the associations with the need for mental health treatment as a result of an athletically related injury, and not just to the head. And so what we've tried to do, what the architects and what Mutual of Omaha has tried to do, is listen to the needs for the membership and say, let's start by actually providing a benefit that if the treatment can be linked to an athletically related injury outside of the head, then they are going to consider that eligible for treatment. Now, it has to be documented. Again, this is key to the entire theme of this conversation and also the program. But if they can link the athletically related injury to the need for mental health treatment, then it's going to consider some benefits. And I think that's why it was really good that they're starting with the $25,000 per injury. And we're going to see how this is being utilized, and we're going to track it with the data that comes in, and we're going to make some informed decisions on how to either adjust that benefit or see what other opportunities may be there for expanding the coverage as it relates to the mental health. Because this really, while there's the functionality of the claim submission process, there are some of the benefits that we're trying to further understand and be more clear. This is something that is really instrumental to the entire purpose of the PEI policy, because we all know that the number one issue on college campuses is mental health. So for this policy to actually adapt to that, I think is just showing its innovation and the creativity to support what the NCAA has been asking of them. And so I think it's gonna be, unfortunately, utilized a lot. Right, but a need for the program, and so we'll be tracking it and looking at it throughout the entire year.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think as this is also an initiative Charlie Baker has pushed a lot, is student athletes deal with a lot of pressure that we don't even comprehend, right?
Without a doubt.
The newest initiative internally at the NCAA is managing, and this is not even exaggeration, all of the Venmo requests that just normal people are requesting student athletes for dropping a pass, and these people are losing, their $5 bet. So prop bets are such a massive influence, I think, when it comes to mental health awareness for student athletes, because now you're adding another layer, right? People are betting on your performance, and it's just an extra layer of pressure, right, for student athletes, for people who already have to maintain so much and juggle so much in their life. And I think, again, with the data points that we receive through this program, I think we'll be able to enhance and ultimately create some really good benefits surrounding mental health. Because like you said, the collegiate sports world is becoming more intense by the day. And I think student athletes are certainly the people who feel those grudges. And
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, we've been hearing from him on some of this. It is speaking engagements and seeing it firsthand through other outlets, not just that, but the hazing that's been associated with that. And so there's very overwhelming pressure on a lot of the student athletes. And this is a small, but I think eventually meaningful way to address a lot of it. And so, but what's not small is the size of the program, from the financial impact that the NCAA is bearing on themselves to hopefully support the needs of these student athletes moving forward as they are on different campuses, but leaving their other schools as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I don't think sports betting is unfortunately going anywhere, and so we'll continue to see how that evolves. I know we are trying to make a lot of headway there with, you know, government and trying to get some of those things banned and stopped. And
I think that's our next town hall, right? Is it? Sports betting?
Right. Join us for the next.
No, but make no mistake, the mental health component of this is very innovative and very progressive, which is completely counterintuitive to a lot of the insurance industry in general. So we're excited to be able to support it in the way that you've created it.
Yeah, and again, Mutual of Omaha, a great partner in providing those benefits and truly thinking outside the box. So they do a great job for us.
Great. So we're going to move to some live questions. So this might be
Rapid
a little
fire?
bit of a rapid fire for you all. First question, how does this policy work in conjunction with the NCAA catastrophic policy?
Oh, yeah, that's a great plug. The catastrophic policy, which also provides $20 million of lifetime benefit, the program interplays with it pretty much similarly as all insurance policies do now. So a secondary policy, if it hits the $90,000 within 24 months, it automatically goes to the catastrophic program, right? And also if it's a true catastrophic injury, that will also, go straight to the catastrophic program. So the catastrophic program is still there. It interplays just the same. And I think that's also, again, why the limit on this policy is $90,000. So if it does surpass that, it automatically flows right into the catastrophic program, underwritten again by Mutual of Omaha, so it's seamless.
Yeah, it's a really good dovetail. I mean, the CAT medical program is the ultimate catch-all with a $20 million lifetime benefit and only a $90,000 deductible. So if there is a true catastrophic injury, you have all seen the bills out there. You're going to satisfy that pretty quickly. And then that would be eligible for consideration under the CAT medical plan. But the PEI program is really just another layer of benefit extension should it need to get to the 90K over more than just the benefit period for the secondary plan. And so I think, once again, let's make a hypothetical here, because if you were to have a plan under your secondary policy that benefits would be exhausted, but you only had 60,000 of payments in it, and your benefit period ended, and then the PEI program would then pick up for whatever else was from 2 years from your separation. So it's another link potentially into a lifetime of benefits of $20 million. And so not only is the program just very sound standing on itself, but the fact is we've seen a lot of times where a program would not, or a claim would not hit 90,000 before the benefit period ended. And so in theory, this PEI program, based upon the timing of the benefit plan cascade, could, in theory, bridge the gap to satisfy the deductible for a qualifying intercollegiate sport.
Yeah, that was a great question.
It was a great question, so thank you to whoever submitted it. We're going to bounce around a little bit. Would medical services rendered after a student athlete becomes eligible, but before an actual claim is filed or approved, be eligible for reimbursement? So they have their injury, they receive medical treatment, but then they realize, uh-oh, I didn't file my claim. Would we still cover that?
We would consider it, right? We can't say yes or no in this capacity because we don't have the determining facts. But yes, it would be considered. Again, it goes back to the documentation.
It could be eligible for reimbursement, though.
It could be eligible for reimbursement.
Yes. Perfect. Wonderful. Are there any limitations on physical therapy benefits?
I think that's a very broad question. And, depending on what it stems from, right? I mean, I'm assuming we're stemming from an athletic-related injury here. But, I think
it medically necessary.
Right. I think it would come down to again, also what's prescribed by physician, right? And ultimately, what is included in the physical therapy? I mean, maybe there's broad ranges of types.
Yeah, I mean, it's physical therapy, a spa, right? There's a lot of times that,
Right.
massage is considered physical therapy and coded as such in a lot of ways. And not to get too technical, because I know that sometimes I can be accused of being that. But the reality is it would need, so for instance, in primary insurance world, typically you have 16 visits before you have another prescribing set of physical therapy services.
Right.
So we might want to see some of that. If we're seeing a year and a half of PT with no outcome,
Right.
that's going to raise some flags. And so the idea is that you would have to have a reason for the continued therapy as it relates to treating the injury, not just feeling good.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly eligible under the policy. And again, the due diligence and claim process will certainly work out specifics of.
Right. It's just not an immediate no, is what we're saying.
Right.
No,
There's
absolutely
no
not.
inside limit on,
No.
on the PT.
No.
Okay. If a student athlete is enrolled in the institution and their sport, but sustains an injury over the summertime apart from their sport participation, is the particular injury covered in the PEI program?
Ah, that's a good question,
That's
too.
a great question.
So we get the slot on the base plans, on the secondary accident plans.
Yep.
And so we could use an example to maybe help illustrate the answer. If you are performing the duties within the scope of your conditioning or
Yep.
your athletic activities as not prescribed, but as scheduled from
Right.
your team and from your coaches and from your
That's the
from your
key.
strength and conditioning team.
Yep.
So if it's related to that, then yes, there
Right.
would be benefits that could be eligible upon determining and confirming the other components of the claim. It's also important to note if you're, say, playing a recreational basketball camp,
Yep.
or if you are potentially helping out with a summer camp for kids and you happen to get hurt, I don't think that Mutual of Omaha would consider that part of a covered injury, just in the same sense that we wouldn't from the secondary market.
Right.
And so some of those nuances are very important to note that, maybe a more hyperbolic example would be if you're surfing in the summer with your family and friends
Right.
and you get hurt.
A little different.
No,
Yeah.
that's,
Unless-
that's an easier
Right,
one,
unless-
unless you're on the surfing team.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're on the surfing team.
Unless
and
you're on the
it's
serving team.
Which is not a
NCAA
qualifying-
recognized sport. Right.
Yeah.
So if it's
Okay.
not
I'm
that.
going to get on that committee. My goodness. That sounds like fun. One more question from the audience. So we have 3 injuries right now with fall sports seniors that have they've exhausted their athletic eligibility.
Okay.
And all injuries already have a claim filed with AG. Injuries happened this fall. 1 graduated this year in December.
Okay.
2 graduate in May. We would do a PEI claim for all of these, but 2 have not graduated. Would they need to do a voluntary withdrawal form to trigger the policy to be activated?
In short, yes, they would need to do that. It sounds like that person understands this very well, actually. But ultimately, yes, what we want to ensure is that, right, there is opportunity for eligibility for other sports, just within NCAA bylaws, right? And so we want to make sure that they're not going into any other sport, not just the sport that they came from or, exhausted eligibility, but just ensuring they're not going back to play in any sports, right, before they file a claim against the PEI. So yeah, ultimately they would have to file that voluntary withdrawal form, and then they would be eligible without having to technically separate from their school.
Wonderful.
And then the one, I don't know if this is probably the question, but just came to mind, but the one that graduates in December, they could in theory be eligible for treatment now.
Correct.
Right.
Or as soon as they graduate, whenever
Exactly.
that may be. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't see any other live questions coming in right now. Before we wrap up, we are getting close on time. Do either one of you, Liz or Dixon, have any final thoughts regarding the policy and the program, the benefits, claim submissions, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I do want to kind of add, this has been a very lengthy process, right? It took us a full year to manuscript, finalize the program. We had to submit it to the Department of Insurance in the state of Indiana, right? And so a lot of thought really went into this program, right? And then when it came to thinking about how the claims are going to be handled, right? And ensuring that we eliminate fraudulent claims as much as possible. but more so, how do we make it easy to file a claim, right? Anybody who has insurance knows that, filing a claim is not fun, right? Nobody wants to do it. And typically, it's like I said, out of sight, out of mind. When you don't use it, you lose it, right? And so in today's world, everybody kind of operates from their phone, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we had an accessible way for student athletes and anybody at the institution as well who has to complete a form for the PEI program to be able to do it easily. And obviously, as we walk through it, it's very simple, right? And I think it took about 30 seconds from start to finish. So I just want to, reiterate the fact that a lot of thought went into this, right? And the more feedback, right, that we can get as we utilize it, the more data points we can get and observe, make, educated decisions, right, and how to, further enhance the program. I think that's certainly what we're going to continue to do at the NCAA. But again, couldn't have done it without our awesome partners, Mutual of Omaha, you all, right? I think it's a team effort, certainly. And again, all of our member institutions that have continued to educate their student athletes, right? Also, all of the work that you guys are already doing, making sure that catastrophic claims get filed, right? And our student athletes know that those benefits are there. So I think it's just continuing to improve, right? The standard that we want to adhere to at the NCAA, which is the highest standard possible for all of our student athletes from a safety, health, and wellness perspective.
I think I would only add to those great points is it's outstanding to be a part of a program that has such a potentially profound impact on so many different student athletes. And to think in an industry or in a niche that sometimes isn't as progressive as we would always want it to be,
right.
This is a very significant step towards how we can continue to support the student athlete environment in its current state. And so that's a huge challenge that I think you guys have done really well and Mutual has done really well, and we're excited to serve and support the program to continue also from adoption to socialization to a better understanding of access to this, that hopefully over time we can be a meaningful partner to all 550,000 student athletes who may or may not need access to this program. So
wonderful. Well, we're about out of time with that. And if you have any follow-up questions after today's town hall, you can feel free to send anything related to the PEI program to ncaa@agadm.com. Liz, Dixon, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Liz, thank you so much. We're very grateful to be riding along with you in this program, and also a shout out to our friends at Mutual of Omaha. Thank you very much for the chance to support and serve our entire student athlete body at the NCAA in this capacity. Amanda, great job today as well.
Thank you.
And as we wrap up, just a quick shout out to our friends here at Sun Center Studios in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and also the wonderful production work of the team behind the scenes from Color Space Labs. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Take care.